the Special Planning Commission meeting for May 3rd, 2021. And I guess, do I do public comment in this meeting as well, the typical?
Yeah, but let's just go down the list. Let's start with roll call.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, sorry, I'm just getting myself reoriented here. All right, could we have a roll call, please, Cheryl?
Chair Quillisi. He's attempting to connect. Vice Chair Nolan.
Here.
Commissioner Lottis.
Here.
Commissioner Trent. Absent. Commissioner Swift.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, there
Commissioner
he is.
Trent
Yeah.
is here. Okay.
I just heard him.
Yeah, I did too.
Okay, and Commissioner Swift.
Here.
Good. Commissioner Lawrence, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. There it is. Ready? I'll begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. So next we have public communications. This is the time set aside for members of the public to address the commission on items that are not on the agenda. Cheryl, do we have anyone for public comment?
We had 2 public comments that were submitted by email today. One from Bill Miley and one from Steve Colomé, and both were emailed to all commissioners today.
And those were towards the agenda item, correct? Or were they different?
Yes.
The 2 that I received, I believe, were both for the housing element.
Yep, both for discussion item 2.
Okay. All right, so we don't have anything that's non-agendized. We don't have anyone
Correct.
here to speak on that.
Correct.
Okay, good. So then we're going to move along to our informational item, which is number 2, and it's the 2021-2029 housing element update, the 6th cycle of the housing element. And at this point,
Before we go further,
yes,
we have a consent item on the agenda, the minutes for the regular planning commission meeting for April 21st.
Oh.
Or wait, am I?
No, that's, you know what, Lucas, I did that by myself earlier too, and I realized there's 2 different agendas.
Yeah, Lucas, this is a special meeting, so.
This is for tonight, and then I think the minutes is for
apologies.
Wednesday. I caught that myself a couple hours ago when I was reviewing. So, okay, so we will go ahead, and just to let everyone know, so what we're going to be doing is staff and the consultants will be doing a presentation. Then we're going to allow planning commissioners to ask any questions. Then we're going to open public comment. So anyone from the public who would like to, come up for 3 minutes or less, make a comment, we'll be able to do that. We'll close the public comment, and then planning commissioners will, discuss it and see how we want to move forward. So with that, staff,
Yes.
please take it away.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Nolan. My name is Lucas Seibert, Community Development Manager here with the City of Ojai. Tonight we have a special item for discussion, which is the housing element for 2021 to 2029. We're beginning the shift from the 5th cycle, which was the 2013 to 2021 housing elements, to the 6th cycle, which is the 2021 to 2029 housing element. Tonight we have a presentation that's going to be given by Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam and Associates. I see we also have Jamie Power here in support of Veronica Tam and Associates as well, available. And really what we're looking for tonight is this is kind of an official kickoff to the housing element. Veronica is going to give a presentation. There's really a lot of, you could call this kind of, in a way, we're kind of setting the stage here for potentially a deeper discussion with the housing element as we transition into this 8-year cycle. Lots of new regulations to potentially talk about, unpack, and make sure that this housing element for the City of Ojai is meeting those standards and litmus tests for the government through the government code. So with that, I know Veronica has a presentation. I'll pull that up here in a second and share my screen. Veronica, if you want to say a little bit about yourself, you're more than welcome.
Sure. Veronica, Tam Associates, we started our business back 15 years ago, and we're based in Pasadena, small business, but we focus primarily on housing related work. We've done a lot of housing elements. I keep telling people I started writing housing elements since I was 3, because I've probably written more than like 100 of them over the course of my career. So I have to maintain that I started when I was 3. So anyway, with the housing element, I'm going to do an kind of like overview of what's the housing element, what are the requirements, what are the contents, what are the key features of the housing element. Lucas mentioned, my staff Jamie is here, so she'll be taking notes, and she's been diligently working on the updates of the housing element. So with that, next slide. So tonight, I think I mentioned that. I'll talk about what is the housing element, what are the requirements. We are actually not going to talk too much about Ojai today. We have some slides about the demographics about the city, but I think the focus is probably going to be on the housing element and the process of the housing element update. If you're interested in knowing a little bit more about the demographics, we have some slides about what's currently in Ojai today. Next slide. So the housing element is part of your general plan. It's one of the integral components of your general plan. There are 7 mandated elements in your general plan, but housing element is probably the most legally regulated element of the entire general plan. It really has a lot of statutory requirements that are coded in the government code. What's the overriding requirement of the housing element is that you meet your obligation as part of the region. You help the region in addressing the housing needs, your share of the region's housing needs. So we'll go into that a little further later on, but the housing element looks at the needs in your community, and also what's the best way to accommodate the needs, not only from your current residents, but also future residents that may come to the city of Ojai. The housing element also sets the goals, objectives, and policies relating to housing, and how to identify conditions and needs within the community. How do you've identified needs in the community, so what are the goals, policies, and programs that you're going to set forth in your housing element that you're going to address those needs in your community. Now, the housing element is also a little bit different from the rest of the general plan, in that in your general plan usually has a longer horizon. It usually has like a 20-year to 25-year planning horizon. The housing element is a little bit different. Housing element has an 8-year planning cycle. In the past, it actually used to be 5 years, but they keep changing the law. And now the current requirements is that you have to update your housing element every 8 years, and has a statutory deadline. It's the only element of the general plan that's on this type of cycle and on this kind of statutory deadline. For what we're dealing with in Ventura County, you're within the Southern California Association of Governments region, and we are on the 8-year cycle starting October 15, 2021. It does have a grace period of 120 days, so you must adopt the housing element within 120 days of October 15, but we're definitely trying to aim for the October 15 deadline here. What also sets the housing element apart from the rest of the general plan is that it's the only element that has to go through a very rigorous review by a state agency. The agency responsible for that is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. And you're going to hear the term of this agency, HCD, quite frequently from a future meeting, that we're going to refer to this agency quite a bit, because they set the standard for review, and they're responsible for review. They're responsible for monitoring compliance. So there's a lot of interaction with the state during the update of the housing element. Next slide. What the housing element is a policy document that sets the stage of how the city is going to facilitate housing production within your community that's consistent with your general plan, your zoning, and other planning kind of documents. What it is not is it's not a requirement that you build housing. The city doesn't build housing, the private market builds housing. So the document, the housing element itself, does not obligate the city to build the units, but you must make sure that you remove roadblocks, that you facilitate the construction of housing, especially if the market calls for it. You may also use funding and policies, incentives in order to facilitate housing that meets the needs of your community. But it, again, doesn't obligate you to provide for funding. Like you may not have funding. If you do, it's your option to provide that to facilitate housing. But the housing element does not obligate the city to come up with funding to provide for the housing. Next slide. Going a little bit deeper about the housing element requirements, the overriding requirement of the housing element is this concept of regional housing needs allocation or regional housing needs assessment. It's a process that's mandated by the state, and I'm going to that a little bit further in the following slides. But virtually, when we send the housing element to the state for review, that's the most critical component of the review. No city, no jurisdiction would be able to meet, would be able to have a compliant housing element, but not meeting the obligation to provide for the regional housing allocation. So the other obligation, the other requirements of the housing element is that you must facilitate housing production to meet your demand, facilitate, but not build it yourself, but set the stage again. Preserve existing affordable housing, because the state recognizes that it's very expensive to build affordable housing. So preserving what you currently have is important to every community. Also, improving the quality and condition of the existing housing stock is important. Facilitating the development of all housing for all income levels and all housing types, especially for the special needs groups. Now, by law, the special needs groups include elderly, disabled, large households, households with 5 or more members, female-headed households, homeless, and farm workers. Those are the special needs groups that are specified in state law. But some other jurisdictions may introduce additional special needs population. For example, if you are near a military base, you would include military personnel, because they do have an impact on the rental housing market. They're more transient in nature. If you're located near a college where there are a lot of students that are from out of state or other parts of the state, that they also would have an impact on the local rental housing market. Those cities that have that type of characteristics would introduce additional special needs population. And last but not least is fair housing. In 2017, the state adopted a very significant requirement by reference from the federal requirement. It's the affirmatively furthering fair housing. So that has a almost profound requirement to the housing, added an aspect of the housing element requirement, that you must look at how you can provide housing opportunities for all, and especially when you're doing new housing, that you have a more equitable distribution of the housing units geographically across the city, so you're not focusing or you're not concentrating, for example, lower income housing in particular neighborhoods. So that's a very difficult requirement right now. In addition to the geographic location, there are a lot of analysis we have to do. I was talking to Lucas earlier that last Tuesday on April 27th, the state released a 94-page guidance on how to comply with this affirmatively furthering fair housing. And that is going to be a little bit difficult for Ojai because you're so small, and you may not have a lot of data to do that analysis. And so we're dealing with that right now. So we'll work through that. Next slide. So when you have a housing element that has to go through state review for complying with state law, there are consequences for not compliance. In the past, there hasn't been a lot of meaning to have a housing element that complies with state law. There wasn't a lot of teeth to the housing element requirement. That all changed since 2017. The state has adopted a lot of new state laws that would give the state more power or I would say oversight power to look at compliance with housing element law. One being that the state HCD is now in charge of monitoring non-compliant housing element and reports that to the state attorney general for litigation. Now, in the past, once you adopted the housing element, they said that you comply with state law, that's the end of it, you've done your job. But now, new state law is allow HCD to decertify any city at any time if they find that you're not being true to your commitment that you outline in the housing element, you're not implementing your programs in a way that's consistent with state law. HCD has the ability to decertify any housing element at any time. And then they can also refer a jurisdiction to the state attorney general for litigation. So most recently, the city of Huntington Beach in 2018 was sued by the state on recommendation by the HCD. So Huntington Beach settled for that with the state and had ended up having to provide for more housing than they originally were responsible for due to the inaction. If you are in a litigation situation, the court finds you to be out of compliance, you can be fined up to $100,000 per month of non-compliance for the first 3 months. It'll increase to $300,000 per month for the next 3 months. And then beyond that, it'll be $600,000 per month if you continue to be out of compliance. So the fines can be very damaging. The other consequence for having a housing element that's sued by anybody and being deemed to be out of compliance by the court would be your ability to issue building permits. More than 10 years ago, the city of Pleasanton was the first one that was sued by the attorney general. And because of that, the city of Pleasanton was the ability to issue building permits was suspended by the court for over a year. And this is not just residential building permits. This is any building permit. And so I think they also end up having to pay attorney's fees that was close to $2 million. In any case, the other consequence of not having a housing element compliant with state law is your inability to access state funds. The city received $160,000 from the planning grants from SB2. That's the funding that you can only get, you could have only gotten because you have a housing element that complies state law. There is the permanent local housing allocation portion of the SB2 grants that would be annual funding, and you would receive it through the County of Ventura as it's being allocated similar to your CDBG program because it functions like a block grant. If you have a housing element that's certified by the state, you're eligible to receive the funds as if you're entitled to receive it as long as you apply for it. And so you will be getting that allocation through the Ventura County. There are other funding that particularly housing funds administered by the states that are competitive in nature. If you do not have a housing element that's certified by the state, the nonprofits that's going for those funding or the city that's going for the funding, you're essentially out of the running because the rating criteria is such that it gives a lot of points for having a housing element that complies with state law. If you don't have that, whatever application you may have, the strongest application, you will just not be competitive for funding. So, next slide. So we talked a little bit earlier about the regional housing needs allocation or regional housing needs assessment. The term is used kind of interchangeably. It starts from a state mandate that the state looks at how much growth is needed in the next 8-10 years. The number for this entire state of California is about 3.5 million units. And that number is allocated to the 7 major regions and smaller regions in the state. Every jurisdiction, every region will get an allocation. And SCAG, the Southern California Association of Government, being the biggest region in the state, got the lion's share of that allocation. Is 1.34 million units. And each county then gets an allocation. The allocation space is done primarily to reflect access to jobs and access to transportation, but the methodology is rather complex. In Ventura County, the overall allocation is about 24,452 units, and the city of Ojai got 53 units. Your allocation is one of the few jurisdictions that got a decrease compared to your 5th cycle of the RENA. Most jurisdictions got an increase that are some as much as many as like 10-15 times the last regional housing needs allocation. But I think the state recognizes your location in the region. It's not access to transportation, jobs may not be the most ideal compared to other cities in the county, and therefore your RENA is 53 units. Next slide. The RENA is divided into income categories, and we're just showing you the 5th cycle, you have a 371 unit RENA, and this time you have a 53. It's actually an anomaly compared to other jurisdictions having that type of reduction. And it's divided into very low, moderate, and above moderate income. Very low means like a household that's making up to 50% of the area median income. Low are people who make up to 80% of the area median income. Moderate income are the people who make up to 120%. And anybody above that is above moderate income. And so in your situation with 53 units, what it does mean is that you must identify sites within your community that's appropriately zoned that would allow you to facilitate and encourage the production of at least 53 units. That is for all income groups and all household types. When I say at least, it's because RENA is considered a minimum, not a maximum. So you need to at least meet that. What is also important is there is a new state law, SB 166, no net loss. SB 166 says that while you are not obligated to produce the unit, but as the sites that you identify for potential housing development gets built, we know that at market, without any type of inclusionary or without any type of subsidies, the housing units at market is only going to be affordable for moderate or above moderate income households. So as your city builds and you use up sites in your housing element and you only produce upper income or above moderate income units, you need to be able to demonstrate to the state that you continue to have sites available for the lower income unit that you might not have met yet. So the no net loss requires cities to be on an ongoing basis, monitor your site status and making sure that you continue to have adequate sites for your RENA for all income groups. Next slide. So just kind of moving the discussion a little bit, honing in onto, well, how are we going to meet the regional housing needs allocation? Something that's a little bit for people hard to grasp is the RENA. Even though your housing element starts October 15, 2021, your RENA projection period actually starts July 1st this year. Well, actually June 30th this year. So anything that you built, you permit, or you approved after June 30th this year gets credited towards your regional housing need allocation for the 6th cycle, and it actually gets double count for your 5th cycle, yes, because the 5th cycle doesn't end until October 15. There's this overlapping period, but anything that is entitled, approved, or permitted during this overlapping period, you get to count it both for your 5th cycle and for your 6th cycle. We don't think there's a lot of projects right now that's been entitled yet. But if there is anything that happens between now and October 15, we certainly can get credit for it. The other important piece of the RENA strategy is the accessory dwelling units, ADUs. The state recognizes that ADU is an important resource for housing, and certainly for affordable housing, because a lot of times they're generally available to family members or to people who are to rent it out at less expensive rate. So for ADUs, though, we're allowed to take credit for ADU, but not based on capacity. In all other things that we looked at, whether you have adequate sites, we talked about capacity. But in this particular situation, we're talking about, have you been building ADUs in your community? And if so, you can take a look at how much ADU you built in the last 3 years when the state has changed the state law to relax the ADU development. So if you're able to demonstrate that there's a healthy trend of ADU in the last 3 years, you can use the same trend and project that into the future, how much ADU you will be able to meet. But the state doesn't want you to just look at ADUs, because the requirement of the state law is that you must facilitate the production of housing for all income groups and all household types, with a variety of housing types as well. So you want to make sure that there's a diversity of housing options in your community for the different populations in your community. So we do look at the ADUs. And whatever the other portion of the component of the site strategy, or the strategy to meet the RENA, is identifying sites with appropriate density and development standards that are currently either vacant or underutilized, with the potential to be redeveloped over the next 8 years. And particularly for lower income RENA, the state law has established a default density of 20 units to the acre for Ventura County if your population is below 100,000. And certainly that applies to the city of Ojai. But anything that is above 20 units to the acre is primarily considered to be feasible for moderate and above moderate income. Now, that default density doesn't mean that if you build something at 20 units to the acre, it will be affordable to lower income. That's not what the state is suggesting. It's using density as a proxy for feasibility. So at this kind of density, that the development is more likely to be financially penciled out if they go, for example, if it's a nonprofit that goes to the state for funding, then they would not have to apply for a significant amount of subsidies, because the density is high enough that the subsidy would be reasonable. If your density is only, like, for example, 4 units to the acre or 8 units to the acre, single family home type of density, then the subsidy is so high that you will never be competitive in any kind of funding application. So the default density is suggesting that at this default density, is more feasible financially for a nonprofit for affordable housing to occur. It doesn't mean that built at this density at market, it will be affordable. So next slide. So just looking a little bit about your ADU trends, we were able to get data from the city about your ADU and your junior ADU. And I think the junior ADU, because the city just recently amended your zoning code to allow junior ADU, so you're beginning to see junior ADU in your community. And you also have another component that doesn't happen very often in other jurisdictions. Is legalizing illegal units in your community. You do have, again, a healthy trend of that. So we, based on this trend, we certainly would be able to project some ADUs into the future. That would be part of your RENA strategy. But we also want to be conservative in that projection, because right now, when the law is new, there may be a lot of interest, but then it may the interest may die down a little bit. So we want to make sure that we're more conservative in projecting the ADU trend into the future. Next slide. I think the next slide, I'm going to pass it to Lucas for a couple of slides, because he wants to talk about the SPL overlays, and that's another component of our RENA strategy. So Lucas?
Yeah, so this was a strategy that was applied to the 5th cycle. And what it highlights here is really 9 different sites, 8 different sites in total, 9 separate sites that are highlighted here throughout the community itself. And they range in size, and some of these are actually owned by the city. Some of them are private properties, not owned by the city. And I know, Veronica, you can probably chime in here in terms of the minimum requirements in order for these sites to be qualified as sites to receive an SPL overlay. But I know one of them speaks to size. I think another one speaks to, I think there's preference given to vacant lots, which I think, as everybody knows here, we don't have a lot of those. Any of them that are vacant typically have challenges that are tied to them. So that's not uncommon for a lot of communities within Southern California. We're running out of room to develop, right? So there's challenges that come up with that, and Ojai is no different in that respect. So with that, I'll move on to the next slide. And this potentially creates a bit of discussion, but tonight, as well as other things that certainly the commission is going to have an opportunity to discuss, and the community to weigh in as well during public comment, is the sites that are currently listed as SPL overlay. There are opportunities for discussion for sites to potentially be taken off. So Planning Commission will have the opportunity tonight to discuss that. Here is an example of 2 sites, both owned by the city. One of them, Site 10, which is actually City Hall, and the site where Help of Ojai is located at, and where the pickleball is located at. And then Site 11, which is a vacant lot, which is also owned by the city, for discussion. So with that, I'll pause the presentation. I know there's a lot of information to take in. With the housing element as one of the required elements that goes through an 8-year cycle, there is a lot to digest here for the commission and for the community to think about as we push forward towards the October 15th date. Veronica, if you could talk us through just briefly the next steps, and then I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Nolan.
Sure. So what we do intend to do after tonight, getting some direction from the Planning Commission regarding sites, we're going to go back and formulate the housing element, and our goal is to present the draft housing element to the Planning Commission in the next meeting. We're hoping in June. And after that, we will have to provide the housing element to the state for the 60-day review. The state will have 60 days to look at the housing element, and we would try to address their concerns within the 60 days. And sometimes it may require a second round of review, and typically the second round, they can expedite it a little bit. So after that, once we have negotiated all the changes with the state, address all the comments, then we would bring the housing element back to the planning commission and the city council for adoption. And once adopted, the housing element has to go back to the state again for the final review. That review is 90 days, but it can occur outside of the October 15th deadline or outside the grace period. And they'll take 90 days to look at it and stay and confirm that the city has actually adopted something that is certifiable. So, so that's generally the process that we're going to take. And the challenge is certainly time and certainly the new requirements on the AFFH that we have to deal with.
Okay, thank you, Veronica. With that, that concludes the presentation. Commissioner or Vice Chair Nolan, sorry. If you'd like, we can, if the commission has any questions, we could dive into that. We could open it up for public comment.
Yeah, I think it's good right now to allow the commissioners to ask any questions. And then when we're done with that, then we'll open up public comment. So fellow planning commissioners, I can't see everybody right now.
Here, I'll stop. Let me stop sharing.
Oh yeah, get me back on gallery. Okay, I see Kathy. I'm not seeing Kathy Lottis. Commissioners.
You're muted.
Who's muted?
I was, now I'm
Oh,
not.
you are. Okay, now I can see everyone. Okay, good. That helps. Please, if you have any questions for staff, and we will be coming back after the public comment period is closed and we can recontinue our discussion. But for now, if you have any present or questions for staff or the consultants, this is a good time to start. Chair Quillisi?
Thank you. Going back to the chart that you had, the regional housing needs assessment numbers for Ojai, I recall hearing from, which is a total of 53 units, I recall hearing from Lucas that to be safe, we ought to designate parcels with a potential of about 3 times that, or say 150 units. It's clear from the last cycle that we did designate land with SPL overlay that was not currently zoned for residential use. And I guess my question is not for Veronica, but for staff. Does the SPL overlay trump the basic zoning of a particular parcel? Because I saw some, for example, that are in C1 zone right along Ojai Avenue. And then the one on Bryant Street is clearly either M1 or MPD, but that's legal. One, if you designate SPL, then you can build low cost or affordable to some degree housing pretty much anywhere you want, independent of the base zoning.
Yes, it provides for the opportunity, not the requirement. In Veronica's presentation, she was identifying that it provides that opportunity for that density to meet that RENA number, the number that's been provided by SCAG through HCD.
Okay, if an attempt were made, let's say on one of those parcels along East Ojai Avenue on the north side there, if someone wanted to build affordable housing there where the SPL overlay already exists, do they have to come back through the planning commission and then ultimately the city council to get a zoning change? Or is the existence of the SPL sufficient for them to go ahead and do that low-cost housing?
It depends. For the most part, the zoning would be just. That's really what you'd be looking at. The use would be just from a density standpoint. Depending on the proposal and whether they're meeting all of the requirements that are identified within our municipal code for SPL, within the SPL article. I forget the name of the article itself, but
102,704, I think.
12704. All of those requirements would have to be made. If any one of those requirements aren't made, then the authority becomes planning commission and potentially city council.
Becomes
The
discretionary.
streamlining
Otherwise,
aspect
it's,
of that,
otherwise it's ministerial to build the affordable housing on an SPL designated parcel.
a zone clearance, yes, ministerial. If they meet every single aspect within, and we're talking a very strict standard at which to operate. If any of those are amiss, then the whole thing's thrown out the window, and
Sure.
you lose out on the ministerial.
Like anything else, it stops being ministerial, becomes discretionary. Just one other question. In the discussion of the designated parcels, you noted that there, at least what I heard was there was some rationale for taking sites 10 and 11, the city-owned property, off the SPL list. And I did not understand the rationale. Could you explain that?
Sure. So both of them, I mean, looking at all of the site designations for SPL, there are other sites out there that are city-owned. And at tonight's, and that's really what's up for tonight's discussion, is whether or not the sites that have been identified here tonight are worthy of that, or if there's others that are worthy of it for further discussion. I don't necessarily want to get into the weeds of whether or not the two sites that have been identified are worthy of it, but I think it's definitely worth the discussion for potentially any of those, and looking at whether or not they should be they're warranted for removal.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Commissioner Lottis?
Well, I just have one follow-up question to something Chair Quillisi was talking about. And so the reverse side of the coin for the PL, wait, what zone is it?
SPL.
So if there's a site zoned with the SPL overlay and it does not get used for housing and it gets built for something, say, in the underlying zone, is there a penalty that we pay for that, or what are there any consequences at all?
Excellent question. What happens is that we end up losing out on those numbers, those units, which, to Chair Quillisi's point, was in the staff report, I identified that we really should be looking at 3 times the number that we've been allocated to build that necessary buffer in the event that some of those sites, any of those sites that end up not getting built for affordable housing, we end up losing out on those numbers, because right now we're extremely tight in the numbers we're looking at. So if any of those sites were to be developed as something else other than affordable housing, we would be non-compliant, which makes me feel extremely nervous. I'm not sure about the commission, but it makes me feel extremely nervous. So we build that buffer. If there's sites that end up coming off because something else gets developed, it's not affordable housing, we have that buffer in place.
Okay.
Commissioner Trent or Commissioner Swift, do you have any questions? Oh, Commissioner Trent.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, just a quick question on the SPL. It does trump the current zoning. Does the zoning come into consideration at all? Considering, like, if there's a property that's designated within the overlay that's in like a residential area or a lower density area, does like the 20 acres per or 20 units per acre come into play, or is that something that's?
Yes, the like I was saying in the beginning, the 20 units per acre, sorry, 20 units per acre comes into play and as an opportunity, not as a requirement. So it meets the litmus test from HCD's standpoint that's passed on to SCAG, that's then passed down to jurisdictions such as Ojai. Not required, but certainly something that is within the realm of opportunity for that specific developer that's looking to develop on that specific site. If they forego that, the base, what would be referred to as the baseline zone for that site, would rule.
Okay.
So it kind of gives you an additional option, if you will,
Yeah.
And meets the requirements that we're bound by for each jurisdiction within the state of California.
Yeah, because we don't have anything that's zoned for 20 units per acre, right? Currently?
No, we do. No, you're talking about the base zone?
Yeah.
No, I think the most we have is 8 units to the acre. So this definitely bumps that up significantly.
So then is there height requirements at that point?
Yes, SPL has its own toolbox for development standards. Absolutely, to work within.
Is there a certain maximum height that they can go?
I don't remember the certain height. I want to say it's 35 feet, 3 stories, I believe.
Okay. Gotcha.
But don't quote me on that. I'll look it up here for 1 second.
Okay. And then another quick question. I know that the term affordable is always something that's hard to define. So when you guys are, when the state is looking at their numbers for affordable, do they look at like a certain percentage income, certain percentage of income goes towards housing costs? Is that how they come up with the calculation?
Yeah, I'll punt that to Veronica. She can speak to that
Yeah.
specifically.
Right. Typically, it's about 30% of your gross household income if you don't spend more than that, including like utilities and taxes and insurance. So it's not just rent or mortgage, it's housing costs. You don't spend more than that is considered, generally considered affordable. But in most cases, when we see communities, we're really looking at a lot of lower income households spending more than 30, 40, 50% of their income on housing.
Right. Yeah. And I guess because it's hard to find builders that will build it for those costs, right? I mean, they don't want to lose money.
Yeah. And generally, affordable housing is not achieved by at the market. It's typically done with affordable housing developers, nonprofits. Particularly, there are some very active one in Ventura County, and I think we invited them to come to the meeting tonight as well.
Got it. Okay.
Yes, there are several nonprofits that I invited to the meeting tonight, and we'll be continuing to invite as we move forward here.
Anything else, Commissioner Trent?
No, I think that's it as of right now. I'm sure I'll have something else, but
Okay, good. Commissioner Swift?
Yeah, just a question for Lucas. How did we do in the 5th cycle? Did we meet the requirements?
So in terms of meeting the requirements, yes, we met the requirements. In terms of meeting the numbers, no, we weren't even close. In terms of meeting the requirements to the state, yes, that was how we were able to get a certified housing element for the 5th cycle. But in terms of meeting the numbers for the 5th cycle, no. I mean, I want to say we're probably close to 200 units short, which is probably one of the. Look, there's a methodology. I know that Veronica, she's a wealth of information, and she knows this as well as I do. SCAG came up with a I would call it a fresh perspective on the methodology, and the methodology really steered around larger cities that have mass transit or commuter components that allow for larger populations to be moved throughout the city, like for instance buses and trains, and so it's mass transit kind of focused versus Ojai, your smaller communities, which really don't have that that type of an aspect. Veronica, what was the term that they used? It was something like
high quality transit, access to high quality transit and access to transportation. I don't have your most recent APR annual progress report, but based on your 2019 annual progress report, the city met 63 units of your 371 unit requirement, and nothing affordable.
Yeah. So, I mean, realistically, Ojai is very kind of slow with growth and quick with preservation of what we currently have. I think that's probably the best way to describe where we've gone the last 8 years.
Commissioner Swift, do you have another question?
No, that was all.
Okay. So I have a question. So tonight, we looked at the SPL overlay sites, which were developed in previous cycle, or present one actually. And if I understood correctly, I think you said, were there only 63-ish, you can clarify that, sites identified within those SPL locations?
Oh, in terms of sites, it was a total of 8, 9 sites. One of the sites actually has 2 properties identified as one site.
And so what would be the total potential units that would have been covered on all those sites?
As a maximum,
Yeah,
it's right around 371.
well, that's
We
what I
don't really
thought.
we don't have a lot of, I think it's 371 plus 8, I think is really what we're looking at.
Yeah,
So
so
we have
that's
8 units as a buffer versus kind of what I've put out in the agenda report, which is 3 times that, to ensure that we've got some sort of a buffer.
right.
Forward.
So then my next question is, because we have the opportunity to possibly delete some of those and or add new ones. Is this, and I don't even know if you can answer this, but is the city aware of any potential or future projects coming in on any of those privately owned sites?
With the current SPL sites you're talking
Yes, in other words, the privately owned sites that have the SPL overlay potentially could be affordable housing, but they could fall into something under the original zone as well.
Am I aware of projects that
Yeah.
could be coming down the pipeline? Yes.
Yeah.
Have
Okay.
those projects been officially submitted? No.
Okay, so they're kind of out there in the ether, but
They
they're in
are,
the ether.
yes. Until they're actually submitted, it's difficult to say whether or not those are ever going to end up moving forward.
Right.
We
So-
speculate, and certainly
Yeah.
there's a lot of conversation, but
Yeah. So it seems wise, to kind of speculate that potentially something else other than affordable housing could go in on those sites. In which case, and I don't know if we're going to get into it tonight, but has the city looked at any other sites that potentially could fall under the SPL that we, if it's not tonight, but maybe at a future meeting, could actually look at to broaden our discussion?
might we pause that for a moment and see if there's
Okay.
anybody in the audience? Because I know that there have been individuals that have reached out to me
Okay.
personally asking, and so I want to make sure that they're in the audience tonight to have an opportunity to speak.
Okay, good. Commissioners, any other questions for the moment? We're going to come back. I see Commissioner Trent has a question.
And I think Commissioner Trent, you have a question, ask the question. I have the response regarding the height if you'd like.
Oh, okay.
Height from
Yeah.
earlier.
Oh, okay. Just a couple real quick questions. Was environmental considerations part of the calculation? Like, obviously we're in a drought, lack of water, that type of thing. Was that part of the calculations?
Absolutely. There's an EIR that was prepared for the fifth cycle. There will be an addendum to that EIR as part of the 6th cycle.
Got it.
So they'll be doing a full evaluation and then doing an addendum to that.
Awesome. And then also population, demographics, so that's part of the calculation as well, because
Absolutely, that's part of the EIR process.
right. Okay. And then just a clarity on the ADU, that does count towards the number?
It does now. It didn't used to, and it was very difficult. I know in a previous city, we had worked it. I don't know if Veronica has done this in other cities where you argued it and then you provided the clarification and then somehow they were accepted. Now they're just accepted, period. They've just done away with the long, exhausting argument for it.
Now are ADUs able to get those subsidies as well? Do they qualify?
No, ADUs typically doesn't get subsidies. I think the difficulty with ADUs today is that it's expensive to build, actually, and we may get a lot of people apply for it because it's a good idea. They think that it would, enhance the income or provide for housing for family members until they take the plan and get a contractor to bid on it, and they realize it's actually quite expensive. So part of the housing element requirements, especially if you are going to use ADUs to meet your regional housing needs allocation, you have to provide actions or incentives or to make it more feasible for people, and what are the things that you're going to do to help. Examples would be some cities would be developing pre-approved plans that would save a homeowner like $10,000–$15,000 of having an architect or somebody draw the plan of an ADU. Some jurisdictions would reduce the fees for the ADUs. Some cities would go to the state for funding that would provide for ADUs construction. Especially you have a legalized program, like kind of almost like an amnesty program to legalize illegal units. Some cities would pursue funding at the state level to help these homeowners to make the corrections, because it is expensive to do the code corrections.
Right. And
Thank you.
Commissioner Colisi?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of things to add to the discussion of what it costs. I'm also part of the sanitary district, and that was the reason for my being late to this meeting. I apologize. The difference in newly built ADUs, which are probably the most expensive because they're built from the ground up, and conversion type ADUs, whether it's internal junior ADUs or a conversion of a garage or breezeway or other structures that already exist, is quite a bit less than stick built from the ground up. And stick built from the ground up carries a sizable capacity charge from the sanitary district. The conversions don't carry any. I had another question for Lucas, though. We're talking about SPL overlays, and I'm wondering if you could give us a brief idea of how, what the process is like that puts an SPL overlay on a parcel, who has to approve it, who has to request it, and what's the process for taking the SPL overlay off of a parcel. And of course, there's bound to be one process for privately owned parcels, one for government owned parcels. But could you give us a general idea of that? Because if we were to lose a couple of the current 8 or 9 parcels that are on the list, and we had to go find some others, what sort of hoops would we have to jump through as a planning commission and as a city, particularly with privately owned parcels, to get SPL overlay put on those to help us make the RENA numbers?
right, so it would be what's referred to as a zone change. And that is a legislative action. If you were to make that change, like for instance, with the housing element in terms of what we're working on here, it's a legislative action. It is changing, while it's changing the general plan in terms of bringing that up to speed as a general plan amendment, it's also modifying our zoning code. So by doing that, you're looking at it going through this body as a recommendation, and then city council in terms of taking final action. And that's to bring this housing element up to speed with the 6th cycle and our most recent RENA numbers.
So with a privately owned parcel that might have an SPL overlay in the future, who requests it? Does it require the agreement of the private owner, or does the city get to do that without the private owner's request? Or who requests such a zone change from the planning commission first, and who has to agree to it before the request comes to the planning commission?
Yeah, you would want to have the property owner involved in that, most certainly. You wouldn't want to do that blindly. You would have to notify the property owner even of the SPL overlay. And typically by doing that, you end up doing a 300-foot radius and identify. It's a courtesy, but I've seen that done in other cities. And I would, in something like this, if we were initiating a new SPL overlay, obviously if we're removing them, there's no harm, no foul there. But if we're adding them as a courtesy, I would want to identify to those properties within a 300-foot radius of that SPL overlay that's being designated, because it's the density of that, the impact, potential impact to the surrounding needs to be, those residents or property owners need to be made aware.
Okay, I guess what I was getting to at the core of all this, does the private parcel owner have to agree to the SPL overlay for it to become a request to the Planning Commission? Or can the city request it and simply notify the private parcel owner of the request?
I think in response to that, you typically want them involved. I think that's probably the best way to describe that. Are they absolutely required to agree to it? It's my understanding that they're not. And the reality is that even as an overlay, you're not required to build to that density. It's more of a opportunity if you see that in that way, versus having just the baseline zone. Does that make sense? I know the question that you're asking. You're saying yes or no, and in terms of whether or not the property owner is required to agree to it. And I think the correct answer is that they're not required to agree to it, because they're not required to build to that standard.
But it makes sense to involve the property owner for many reasons, because this is this is taking action on what they can build on their property. And so often to avoid litigation, it's important to have the property owner there in that, so that they don't, for example, bring a takings challenge to the city action.
Right.
And then you also, with an SPL zone, you have to you can't approve any housing development at a lower density than what's assumed for that site in the housing element, unless you make a no net loss findings. And so there's a lot of constrictions on the SPL zone. So the new law says that you have to make concrete no net loss findings. And so all of that would come before the Planning Commission to make those findings. So, or whether to approve or deny projects within that zone. And so it would be a very good idea to involve the homeowner in that conversation.
What I saw on one of the earlier charts was that if you are building affordable housing for the lower income, that is the bottom two categories, then that density is up to 20 dwelling units per acre. But if it's for moderate, perhaps even low, I'm not sure, then moderate or above moderate, then the development could be less than 20 dwelling units per acre. It was not specified on the chart how much less. And so I'm just looking at a hypothetical. If we put an SPL overlay on a parcel without the parcel owner's agreement, and the parcel owner then decided to develop the property at a density of less than 20 dwelling units per acre, where is the situation? Is there a problem with doing that? Is that within the bounds of the SPL overlay? And I guess this would be both for Lucas and Nikhil. I'm not sure.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that. So really what would end up happening is that, and that's really where we're looking to build in that 3 times the RENA number that we've been assigned. So let's just say that the density for, X property was 80 units, right? Let's just say it was a larger property, but they end up building it and it ends up being 40 units. We've lost out on those 40 units. So that ends up being a loss with the SPL overlay, right? So you end up losing those units as a part of the 150 that we ended up accounting for, let's say. we're still okay from a housing element standpoint. And we're not going to have HCD breathing down our neck. But we need to be aware of that loss. And we report that as a part of the annual APR. So that comes out every year. So we would be reporting that. There's a fairly robust Excel spreadsheet that when I say they, I mean HCD has put together for monitoring of new units and the whole issue and challenge with no net loss at this point. It's not necessarily a loss because we've built in a buffer, whereas if it ends up getting built at a lesser density, we're still operating in compliance with HCD and state law. If that makes sense.
Commissioner Lottis?
Well, I have questions, but I was going to wait until the public comment was over. But actually, I think I do have one right now. Maybe for Victoria Tan, maybe for staff, but we don't currently have inclusionary housing, correct? Okay.
No.
And so what is the, Victoria, what is the current thinking on inclusionary housing? I mean, we've kind of gone, I mean, in the 90s, we had some big time inclusionary housing. We moved away from that. And I'm not real familiar with the history of that, but maybe that was because of court challenges. So where are we now, and what is happening in that?
Okay. Certainly, there's been a lot of times like a flip-flop in terms of how the state views inclusionary. When the market is depressed, they view inclusionary being a constraint, but when the market is at its peak, they feel that that's the only way jurisdictions will be able to get inclusionary. And so with a lot of the legal challenges kind of resolved, and the state also passed a specific state law about inclusionary, it kind of removes some of the constraints now that if you adopt an inclusionary policy that's within 15%, then it's considered to be a legitimate local jurisdiction kind of discretionary policy to do that, and it doesn't require you to do a lot of the justifications for that policy. But if you go beyond 15%, then you definitely need to demonstrate to the state that you're not impeding market rate construction by putting in an overly burdensome inclusionary policy. Now, with the no net loss requirement, that how, as you build market rate housing, you keep using up sites that you have to replenish. A lot of communities are looking into inclusionary because every 10 units you build, you don't have to replenish 100%, like 10 units of capacity, because you would gain a couple of inclusionary units from that. So a lot of communities are contemplating inclusionary, but the cautionary note is that you don't put the requirements at a point where it's constraining market rate development.
So my understanding in reading the housing element is that the inclusionary is largely or almost entirely market rate. Is that correct? I mean, it's housing product that is then sold. Is that correct? Can it ever be rental?
Yes, with the way that the state law has resolved the legal challenges that presented the issue. At one point, I think it was, you remember some of the flip-flops, and inclusionary can be both ownership and rental, and with the challenges that against the city of Los Angeles, then a lot of cities dropped the rental component of inclusionary and kept the ownership portion of it. But with all the new changes in state law and resolving some of the legal issues, now cities are putting back the rental component on the inclusionary.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Oh, Commissioner Swift?
Yeah, I have a question, might be more for Lucas, but anybody else? Can any landowner come forth and say, hey, I want my property included in the SPL overlay, if they find there's a benefit to it for any reason?
Yeah, they can put in that request, absolutely.
Okay.
There's
Yeah,
no
just-
there's no restriction to it. I think
Okay.
that's the thing to take out of it. Even all the zones are on the table. I think is probably the best way to put it.
Because I do know, as a local and knowing a lot of people here, affordable housing is commonly mentioned and brought up and a concern because of the schools and everything. And the street where I live in, pretty much downtown, I've been approached by at least one private developer that has talked about wanting to buy our whole street block because we're all zoned R3 and wanting to build, high density housing. And it's just, I know there's stuff in works and there's people talking. So I was just wondering, if it benefits the city, if some of these people who might have a foot in and a foot out might have a better opportunity offering their property up for an SPL, if that helps the city gain additional properties to meet their numbers.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, it's not meant to be a deterrent, but not all people see it that way.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
it's
Thank you.
certainly an opportunity. To Commissioner Trent's point regarding height, I want to correct myself. There are specific standards for each of those SPL zones or overlays, if you will, and they range. All of them are 2-story. They range from 30 to 35 feet in height. I had thought at one point I'd seen 3 stories, but I was incorrect. It's 2 stories across the board.
Thanks for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Any other questions at the moment? All right, in that case, let's go ahead and open it up to public comment. And Cheryl, will you kind of monitor who's coming in and out, and
Yes, sure.
would let everyone know that they've got 3 minutes, and then we'll pass it on to the next person who would like to contribute or ask questions.
Okay, I will allow Bill Miley to come in and speak. Hi, Bill, can you hear us?
Hi now. How about now?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, Bill. You have 3
Okay.
minutes to speak. Thank
All
you.
right. Hello. I've added a new item to my speech. It has to do with the city-owned sites that are red on the map. I would like to see site 11 be considered by your commission and retain it for SPL. It's 2 small 1/4-acre parcels. It's close to everything, and it would enable cottage-type development for affordability, which there's a strong bias in this community for. Okay. Now, my main point, I'm advocating for the consideration of new modular houses for meeting affordable needs of folks with jobs within the city limits of our city. For less than 70 to 100,000, a 1 or 2 bedroom modular can be sought, cited, and permitted, and then based on investment, rented at an affordable price for people who are part of our workforce housing. How do we get it? Well, in order to guarantee that, the city would offer a contract between the property owner and themselves to help fund a modular unit that then could be rented as at an affordable price. And it would be based on the amount of money that the city would put into it, which would drive the level of affordability. I also like to talk about that idea is probably not going to happen, but the next version of my idea probably could. The city, like it has planned on 408 Montgomery to build stick-built, we can't do that because it's now too costly. We would place modular houses on empty lots that the city owns and rents them to workforce housing folks meeting affordability. Instead of $300 to $400 per square feet, would be about $150. In my opinion, this is a better way of going than having an affordable developer get federal and state dollars, which is then going to open up the applications for people living anywhere. Because as I understand it, you can't restrict a local housing development to just people within the city if you use federal money. So I think that's a real good way to go. The entire purpose of what I'm calling a modular housing policy is to enable more folks to be able to live here while working here and being able to afford the rents, keeping the rental costs at 30% or below. So modular homes, that's what I'm stressing. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Miley.
Okay, next we have Denise Wiseman, and I will allow her into the room. Hello, Ms. Wiseman. Can you hear us?
She's muted.
Yeah, I think she's muted.
Yeah. Give her a second here.
Our lower left corner of your screen,
Yep.
there's a button to unmute.
Ms. Wiseman, you're up next and you're muted. If you can unmute, then you can go ahead and speak. And if you don't respond, we will maybe move on to the next speaker, but please stay in the queue because we'll come back to you. Okay, maybe, I think it's okay. Cheryl, does that feel all right to you to move on to the next one and then come back?
Sure. Okay,
Okay.
the next person is Joyce McWilliams. Hello,
Joyce
Ms.
McWilliams? You're muted as well. Can you unmute? It's on the bottom left. Oh, there she goes.
Yeah, I most of the questions and concerns I've had are being addressed. I'm concerned about, of course, most of us are about providing housing for people who live here because of the traffic we're having, problems with people coming in and out. So I mean, these things have already been addressed. So I'm just listening to see what's coming out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McWilliams. I guess we could try Denise Wiseman again and see if she is still with us. Yes, she is. Oh, it looks like she unmuted as well. Cheryl, you let us know when you're ready.
Okay, Ms. Wiseman, can you hear us?
It shows she's unmuted and still here. Ms. Wiseman, are you available? All right, well, let's go to the next one and maybe we'll go through the queue and then pick her up at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd hate to wait that long, but apparently she's not able to unmute.
Okay, the next person we have is Michelle Wells.
Thanks, Cheryl and Lucas and the commission. I just had a question, I guess, from Bill Miley's, I think was the first person to speak, his question around factory built or prefab housing. I think I'm an Ojai native and also know just the pain and almost impossibility of finding housing here. And I think we're all aware of how expensive, it's only gotten more expensive to build with materials and labor. Is there a history around Ojai not accepting prefab or, I think the factory built housing component may be necessary unless you kind of go the affordable route where you're really relying on incentives and tax breaks. but I was just curious if there's a history, or if there's, I think you can do it very tastefully and in the look and feel of Ojai, with some of the groups that are building factory built today, and also a more environmentally considerate way with, typically a lot lower waste and environmentally better products. So I don't know if this is the time or place, but just curious if there's an aversion to that and why.
Steph, do you want to respond to that? And then, I mean, I was going to make a comment, but go ahead, or our consultant.
Yeah, sure. I can respond to that. So any product that is proposed, unless it's following the strict standards of the SPL overlay, and when I say strict, I mean strict, then it would be subject to our design standards. I don't know that I can think of an example where we have a prefab that's come into the city. I haven't been here long enough to see that history play out, but it is discretionary. So it's on a case by case basis. So as those come through, we review them. I think there's a lot to be said about context, continuity, surrounding design features that end up coming into play. So it would be on a case by case scenario, certainly.
Okay.
I just want to make a quick comment about that. This was quite a few years ago while on Planning Commission. There was a residential property that the house had burned, and the property owner came to the Planning Commission with a modular unit, and it actually was installed. And you wouldn't know it driving by. And there's so many more companies now that are offering, different architectural styles. Of course, it would have to meet our design guidelines. But I mean, that's the one unit that I can refer to that we actually did approve at Planning Commission.
Okay, well, thanks.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Cheryl?
You're on mute, Cheryl.
Sorry. The next person is Marusha Clense. My apologies for mispronouncing. Ms. Clense, can you hear us?
She's on mute as well. Marusha, are you available? We're seeing you're here, but you're on mute.
I think this may be the Maruha from County Supervisor Lapierre's office.
Yeah.
There she goes.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
I did some sleuthing during the presentation and found more information regarding the SPL. That was just the question I had, whether or not it was an acronym. I say it's a special housing layer. That's all, just observing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next. We have Susa Francina.
Susie, you're on mute as well. Susan, are you?
I have no plans to speak. I don't know how that happened.
Okay.
Thank you very much. While I'm here, I just want to say excellent questions. This is great. Thank you.
Okay. Next.
Next, we have Ted Moore. Mr. Moore, can you hear us?
Yes, and I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, I live here in the Ojai Valley. I've been here 30 years, and I was calling specifically about the 14 acres across from Nordhoff High School. And I'm working with the property owners. I am a developer, and I have submitted just a kind of a tentative plan to Lucas just recently, just within the last week, and would like the site considered as a affordable housing site. It could be both mixed use. I mean, frankly, it's an empty chalkboard, if you will, that you can work with. And it can handle, it's 14 acres, so you can handle, in much more than the 53 units that you have, but it can incorporate, open space as well. And I do have affordable developers who would very much like to come in and do the whole thing or part of it. So basically, I see it's something that could be designed to fit the context of the Ojai Valley. It's not in the downtown area. It would not increase traffic to the downtown area. I'm well aware of the tremendous need for service employment in the valley. As you see, the traffic volumes in and out in the mornings, it's really significant. So I would ask the Planning Commission to look at it. I'm going to follow up with a meeting with Lucas, and we'll probably be coming forward with a request for the SPL, is that it is, overlay? But I just want to make you aware of it, that's all. And happy to answer any of your questions. I did submit a tentative plan to Lucas just to show what could fit on the property. It is adjacent, coincidentally, to one of the two properties that Denise Weissman owns.
Right.
And she owns 1.6 acres adjacent to this, right on the hard corner. I know Denise somewhat just from past discussions with her. And she's interested in something similar, maybe to work with us. It could be integrated into an overall project. My thought is to put a little bit of commercial on the corner there. I think it plays and fits well into the overall valley. The family would love to have the 20 units to the acre. It could be developed over time, many years perhaps. And I understand the potential controversial nature of it. They've owned it for 150 years, this family. So they've dedicated a lot of land to like the high school and so forth in the valley. So I'm representing them, and I'm also a commercial developer as well. Would I be the actual developer? I'm not fully sure of that yet. I'm just waiting to see really what response I would get from the city, and go forward. So I just wanted to let you know, and I'm certainly willing to answer some questions, but I am going to meet with Lucas as a follow-up and discuss it with him, and you'll get to see a plan here pretty soon, really. So, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Yep.
Chair Quillisi?
Yes. Rumor has it that the latest school bond was aimed in large part at acquiring that same property for an aquatic center, I think. Am I mistaken in that? Are we talking about the same roughly triangular piece of property there along Maricopa Highway? Lucas, do you know?
The school one I'm not familiar with, but the 14-acre parcel is that vacant parcel across the street that he's speaking to, yes.
Okay.
All right, and then I guess we'll wait until that, arrives and comes onto our agenda, and then we'll be able to review it and probably ask more questions once we have that. Cheryl?
Yes, we have Denise Wiseman. We'll try that again.
Oh, good.
Not
Ms.
muted.
Wiseman?
She might be having technical difficulties, huh? Denise, are you able to speak? We see that you're unmuted. The other thing you could do is, I guess is this appropriate that she could write something in the chat if she can't speak?
If she's able to do that, yes.
Yeah. Denise, if you could,
we have two pieces of information. Neither one of them are Denise.
yeah. Denise, if you are not able to speak, we see that you're unmuted, and you have the option to type something into the chat, and I'll read the question, and then, if it needs a response, then we can do that as well. Hmm. All right,
They
well,
have left the
let's
building.
give her a couple seconds here and see if something comes up. Right. Cheryl, do we have any more speakers?
We actually do have a new speaker.
Okay, maybe we move on to that, and then maybe in the interim, Denise will be able to type something into the chat.
Okay. The next speaker is Stuart Griffith. Mr. Griffith, can you hear us?
You know, I actually wasn't on here to speak. I was just trying to log in so I could follow along with the meeting and learn a little more about planning commission, that sort of thing. So anyway, I don't have any questions right now for speaking.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Griffith.
You're welcome.
Should we go back and try Denise one more time and see if we can get through? Denise, are you able to speak, or even if you can't use the chat down at the bottom of the screen? If you select on that, you can type in your question or a comment. Well, unfortunately, nothing's coming through, but Denise, if during the rest of the meeting, if somehow you can communicate and indicate that, we would be happy to take a look at what you're proposing or wanting to share, or question that you may have.
I would
do
like
we
to
have
try. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I would like to try one other option.
Oh, good.
Let's try this. Ms. Wiseman, can you hear us?
He's now muted.
He's now muted, yeah.
Let me see if I can unmute.
Oh, from your end, yeah, that would be good.
No, it doesn't appear to be working.
Okay. Do we have any other members from the public that would like to speak?
It looks like we have spoken with all individuals with the exception of Ms. Wiseman.
Okay. So I guess then what I could do is close the public comment period, take it back to the commissioners, and for some reason, Ms. Wiseman, if you can, access, I guess what I'd be willing to do is open up the public comment and take your comment again. But for now, we're going to take it back to Planning Commission. And our next step is, we can discuss what we've heard tonight and provide any feedback. And then it does say potentially make a motion for recommendation. I do personally have a comment about that, and I wanted to say, it sounds like we're going to be having a second chance to go over the housing element in further detail. Is that correct? Yeah. So I guess I just wanted all my fellow commissioners.
Just to follow up on that, if I could,
Yeah.
Vice Chair Nolan. Not only will you have an opportunity to review it, but there'll be a red line version that you'll have an opportunity to track at and look at. So.
Great. Yeah. So I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. Where I was going with that was.
Ask and you shall receive.
Yeah. So I don't know that we necessarily have to make a recommendation tonight, because we may want to wait until we have more information and have a chance to look at the red line. And in which case, would we continue this meeting or this discussion? Or should I just wait and let's just see what happens after our discussion?
That's a question for Nikhil.
I was planning ahead, trying to look at our options.
I
is the staff and consultant prepared to just briefly or kind of conceptually talk about what they see as proposed changes coming down the pike?
In terms of state law and housing programs that you would need to work on?
No, I meant specific changes to, specific changes in a conceptual way to Ojai's housing element specifically.
At this point, no, but there are certain requirements that are new because of state law. So there are changes to the housing element that are due because of state law. So if I can certainly briefly mention that. One, that we have to facilitate, encourage the development of ADUs. That's a new requirement. And two, if we're reusing sites that's been from the 5th cycle housing element to meet the regional housing needs allocation again for the 6th cycle, those sites would be subject to a by right approval of affordable housing projects if the project includes 20% affordable units. That's a state law. We also need to deal with monitoring of no net loss. So that's an ongoing, and the city has to adopt a procedure to make sure that you're on an ongoing basis monitoring the use of your sites and how you may lose some of the sites due to market rate housing that doesn't have affordable housing. And we all know that it's very difficult to get affordable housing voluntarily at the market. But so when you use up your sites, you need to monitor that. That's another requirement of state law that we have to make sure that we put in the housing element programs. There are also other new state laws regarding objective design standards, so that as part of these are all the things that the city has to do. There's so many state laws in between 2017 and 2019 or 2020, and they're still doing more in the state. I feel like I'm catching up a lot of times. One of the programs that you would have to work on is make sure that you have objective design standards and you follow the state's preliminary project application checklist. You have to use the state's checklist in order to make sure that you request the correct information from the project applicants or developers, and you're doing it in a very standardized and very objective way that what you request a developer to provide. So those are some of the things that are required that you codified in the housing element. There are also requirements to change your zoning code relating to a certain special needs population that makes sure that you provide for, these are things that that's been in place for a long time, and so, but there are some modifications to state law regarding transitional housing, supportive housing, and that your zoning code provides for that you addresses, your zoning code addresses the provision of those type of housing. So those are a lot of the new requirements that you would see in the housing element. And definitely when it comes to the affirmatively furthering fair housing, that's a very significant piece of requirement. And that would have also implications on programs and actions that you facilitate housing in a way that is more equally distributed throughout the city, and that you address the gentrification and displacement issues to the extent that you can. There are also requirements related to improving neighborhoods, making sure that when you put high density housing in certain neighborhoods, that you also have plans to make sure that you provide for amenities and services in those neighborhoods. So those are some of the key changes to state law that would be reflected in your housing element.
So just to,
go ahead.
I didn't quite understand. So if we, I think the second point was if we reuse the existing SPL sites, we have to have additional 20% inclusionary. Did you say that? No, okay.
No. When because we don't have the ability to manufacture new sites, that's why there are only that many vacant and underutilized properties in the city, and if they haven't been built on and we're using them again for your new RHNA, regional housing needs allocation, the state law is saying that, well, if you're reusing those sites, you want to make sure that you facilitate affordable housing development on that. So they actually make the changes before they require you to provide by right housing. But now they said, well, you do by right housing if a project comes in with at least 20% affordable units on it, not everything. But if a project comes in with at least 20% low income affordable units, then you do by right housing.
Okay, and by right housing just means that they don't have any discretionary review. It's
correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Lucas?
I'll go after the commissioners.
Okay, Commissioner Quillisi?
Well, if Lucas is going to address the last topic, he should go first. I still have questions about the existing SPL sites.
Lucas, if you want to wait,
The
or
question is a bigger, it's kind of a big picture question. Veronica, I know that you follow SCAG and HCD and all the workings that go on there, and I think you have staff that's following it very closely as well. Have you seen anything come out down the pipeline or any sort of discussions that have come up that would reward jurisdictions for meeting the RHNA number? So if we meet 53, what do we get? Is there?
I think actually what I see is potentially what comes down the pipeline is what penalties would you receive for not meeting the RHNA? I think it's very unusual for a jurisdiction to have the ability to meet the RHNA, but I think there are also jurisdictions that are not trying hard enough. So there are, the more likely that there are penalties than there are more sticks than carrots, let's put it this way. I'm not aware of any, but there are certainly, I've heard about somebody was suggesting that you know access to grants should be based on. In the past, actually, there is the infill housing grants and the urban parks grant. Those are based on how many units you've built, and that you get a certain amount of money per unit that you permitted. But that funding is basically exhausted, so I'm not sure that there's that potential anymore.
Okay.
Sounds like the reward is avoidance of pain, Lucas.
Right, that stick must be pretty big.
Chair Quillisi?
Yes, thank you. I did have one question, which I started earlier, and I think we have deferred to this point in the discussion. Sites 10 and 11 are specifically marked as potentially coming off the SPL list. And my question is, does the city have plans for developing those two sites with other than affordable housing? I'm not understanding the reason for suggesting they come off the list.
Nope, there's no plan for anything alternative of affordable housing at this point, or even affordable housing at this point either.
What would be the rationale for taking them off the list? That's losing a lot of potential affordable housing.
Yeah, it was meant as a discussion piece. I chose, and this was really meant for the commission to discuss as well, two sites that are owned by the city. City Hall, and then the vacant site just next to it. That was the rationale there.
Could the parcel 10, site 10, I guess it is, could that be subdivided and part of it used for affordable housing? That whatever is not currently being used by City Hall and help with Ojai, or does that use up the whole parcel right now?
The challenge with Site 10 is Site 10 City Hall. I'm sorry, I'm looking at cluster. Yeah, so site 10 is the city hall site. Could it be subdivided? The challenge with that is it is PL. So its overlay is the key there.
The same sort of thing applies to the school district property at Montgomery and Ojai Avenue then.
Oh, you're talking on the north side of Ojai Avenue?
Whatever isn't landmarked, yes, that's all PL.
Correct. That is PL as well.
Site 6 and 7 are just to the east of that. Is that correct? Or is site 6 part of that PL?
Yes. Yep. That is owned by the school district. The site next to it is not, though. Site 7 is not owned by the school district across the.
That's on the other side of the creek, yeah, okay.
Yep.
There's additional property on the north side of Ojai Avenue and at least one parcel on the south side of Ojai Avenue that are currently unoccupied. How would the city go about encouraging those private parcel owners to accept an SPL overlay?
The city could reach out to them, or they could reach out to us. The individuals that you're seeing tonight, for instance, those individuals reached out to us specifically. That was the whole. So some of those individuals own property and have reached out to us to speak to it, to the opportunity to be included as an overlay.
But again, that SPL overlay does not require the development with affordable housing. It simply acknowledges the opportunity for that. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Any other questions, commissioners? Commissioner Trent?
Oh, mute, sorry. Just a quick question on the definition of special needs. You mentioned that that's, part of the population that we want to help. I'm just curious, does the state have guidance on what that is, or can cities kind of define that based on their needs?
The state law does define the special groups that you have to address in the housing element: elderly, people who are over 65 years of age, disabled, and definitely people who are like all kinds of disability, including those who, specifically including those who are developmentally disabled. Large households as defined as a household with 5 or more members. Female-headed households, because female-headed households usually have lower income and also have more of the child care responsibilities. So then their affordable housing needs are usually also more significant, because they need to be living close to transportation, where the kids can amenities where the kids will be able to access. Homeless, that is another defined group. And also farm workers. Those are the 6 specific categories that is defined in state law. But like I mentioned before, some jurisdictions do add in additional groups, and so I'll ask the commissioners if you would like to see other special needs group. Typically, the other special needs group that we have addressed in the housing element include military personnel, because they do, because of the transient character, they may get deployed, in and out, and so they have to be living in more short-term leases, and they have a different kind of impact on the rental housing market. College students is another one. Veterans, who are typically, a lot of them are either disabled or elderly population. We have also jurisdictions. Some of my clients, for example, one of my clients is the city of West Hollywood, and so we in the housing element, we recognize the special housing needs or challenges that the gay and lesbian population may face in acquiring housing. So we do recognize that as a special needs group in the housing element. So it's up to the local jurisdiction whether you want to acknowledge other groups and certainly have programs and actions to address their special housing needs.
Yeah, I know that some cities have come up with programs to help out teachers, because I know teacher affordability is obviously difficult considering, you know, the disparity of, you know, cost and the income. So I was just curious if that group would qualify as well, or if that's something different.
Typically, we do talk about teachers, but not as a special needs group because they're low. A lot of them are lower income or moderate income because they cannot afford it. But we do talked about them a lot of times in context with also some other essential employees or people who, for example, in some communities that they do recognize that in the event of a disaster or emergency, they would like to see their first responders to be able to access the city immediately. But if they cannot afford housing in your community, they can't get to your jurisdiction in the event of emergency. So we do recognize that in some housing elements, firefighters, police officers, medical professionals. Surprisingly, a lot of the healthcare professionals, unless you're like licensed registered nurse or doctors, they're not at the level that can afford housing in Ventura County standards.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? Oh, Chair Quillisi? Commissioner Wattis?
One term that that Veronica brought up earlier was, excuse me, was transitional and supportive housing. For those of you that went to the great trouble of reading through the Cycle 5 housing element, you can find a discussion of that and emergency shelters on page 40. I'm not aware of the term transitional or supportive housing being in the municipal code anywhere. And I guess the question initially for Veronica would be, is it sufficient to put it in the housing element of the general plan, even if it is not directly addressed in the municipal code?
I think that this round you're gonna see HCD being much more stringent in that review and requiring that you do amendments to the code, especially SB 745 that was passed right around the fifth cycle housing element requires transitional and supportive housing to be treated as a residential use to be similarly permitted as regular similar uses in the same zone. And so I guess that would be up to the city attorney. And I understand sometimes cities don't like to regulate by definition, but there may be a situation that is easier to just regulate that based on like defining it that as a residential use.
I have a group home in my neighborhood for troubled teenagers. Does that fall in the definition of transitional and supportive housing, or is that some other category?
It's some other category. There are many categories.
And just to clarify, we do have it listed as a special housing needs category, which is 10-2.909 of the domestic code. So it is living in there. I thought I had seen it at one point when we were going through some of the deeper dive stuff that we've been doing.
And on some things like group homes, for example, there's provisions of state law that preempt the city from regulating on certain issues. So,
yeah.
Commissioner Wattis?
Yeah, I just had another kind of an overview question. In terms of, you know, I was looking at the updated housing needs section of our current housing element, and
where it talks about the housing stock maintenance and the age and conditions, vacancy rate, affordability issues, how homeless numbers and things like that. And I just, what do you foresee in terms of trends and changing that section? I mean, are we going to be looking at a much greater problem with affordability, do you think? For example, increased homeless numbers, and also, what about maintenance of the housing stock?
I think in general, you should expect a worsening situation when it comes to cost burden, because housing is much more expensive today. And also the supply issue, there's just not been a lot of new units available, so you should expect that. The homeless situation has been fluctuating, and I'm not sure whether my staff, Jamie is online, but she may want to, she has some of that information already updated in the needs assessment. So I would imagine overall the situation has worsened. And in terms of the housing stock, definitely there is also a need for helping some of the households to rehab or improve their housing units, maybe particularly for seniors. Not a lot of the seniors, like I think, and this is just speaking of a general term, because without looking at your data directly myself right now, I wouldn't be able to conclude that. But in most cases, what we have seen is that seniors may be sitting on a very a lot of assets in terms of their house. It's worth a lot, but they have difficulty getting loans to improve their homes because of the age, and not having a constant stream of income to qualify for loans. It's difficult for seniors to get improvements, and so that's what we typically see in a community that's aging. Now, in terms of Ojai, that reminds me. Quite a few years ago, I came to Ojai and did a tour of the artist studios. One special needs population that sometimes we deal with, it's artists. Their housing needs are different. And so whether you may want to think about that, like I'm working in the city of Laguna Beach, and they have live work housing for artists. And in another jurisdiction that we're working on, the comment is also to recognize the culture, the importance of artists that brings the culture to the community, and to address their special housing needs. So that may be a special needs group that is important to Ojai, because I remember fondly of that tour. It was very fun, and so it may be something that the city wants to recognize as a special needs group in a community.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I mean, we have a huge artist community here, so.
And yoga instructors too.
What was that?
And yoga instructors too.
Yeah, that's true.
I saw Jamie turning on her video a little bit. Jamie, do you have the homeless population number?
Yeah, I'm pulling that up right now. Let me grab that really quick. Sorry, the lighting in my room is not ideal, but let me pull that up.
Okay, so we'll come back to you when you have the data then.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
So there was a couple of individuals, property owners, that reached out to me last week, and then again even this morning, in regards to potentially being included. And while they weren't here tonight, I wanted to at least mention those properties. So I have a feeling that after today, I'll probably be having more conversations with these individuals. The first one was 214 South Bryant Street. I've been in conversations with the Adamson's property, the owners of that property, about an interest in having that as an SPL overlay. And I can work with Veronica in terms of working through what those numbers would look like as a proposal or consideration. And the other one is 304 South Montgomery. I've been talking off and on with the property owner there for quite some time, and their interest in having that as an overlay as well. So those two, I think it's worth mentioning. I know I sent emails to them, and I'm in conversations with them on a monthly basis. So it's at least worth noting as a conversation piece, and we can run numbers. When they're reaching out to us, we're not reaching out to them. So,
Right.
So would we, I mean, if the commission and council wanted to pursue additional SPL properties, would that just show up as a policy then, or a plan in the action plan? I forget what it's called here. It would just show up as, or would we actually change the zone on that as a part of this whole process?
Yep. Adding the overlay onto it, right? And then including it within the municipal code to include specific standards applicable to that. Yeah.
Lucas, do you, or when do you anticipate our next meeting to review the housing element?
Veronica and I were just talking about that, assuming that we were going to have a second follow-up to this. We and Veronica, chime in here if you can. Take yourself off of.
Yeah, it's June 2nd. I believe that's what.
Shooting for June 2nd. Yes.
Yeah, we're aiming for June 2nd.
Yep.
So generally, would you say that, you know, at this next meeting, or maybe I should just have you, I mean, you kind of gave a little overview before, but, you know, are things like the special needs, of course, these new potential SPL sites, who knows, maybe we will have heard back from Ted Moore by then with a concept, I'm not sure. You know, a little bit of more concrete Ojai information that we'll be able to discuss and go over. Is that generally where we're going?
I think that's fair to give
Okay.
some numbers. They deserve numbers, certainly.
Yeah.
In cases like this.
Good. Chair Quilisi.
Lucas, the two properties that you mentioned on Montgomery and Bryant, are those the one on Montgomery, is that immediately to the south of the Arts Center? That's vacant property?
It is it has a building on it. It's not vacant property.
Down.
Towards the back of the site. It feels vacant when you're just looking at it from the street, but there are buildings towards the back.
And the other one is just to the north of the Condor self-storage?
Correct. Well, to the north of the Condor is a vacant site. To the north of that is Adamson's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a sign out there. I mean, they still have the Adamsons on, and it's fenced and.
East side of the street, right?
Yeah.
And that one actually, they own two parcels there.
Right. Any other questions?
Recommendation?
Yes, that was going to say that's our next item.
I don't think we can go into much detail till we see a red line copy of the housing element.
Yeah.
But just in general, I have a couple of ideas.
Good.
One would be that we not take the city-owned property off the SPL list, the two sites 10 and 11. Second, recommend to the extent that it is feasible in the time frame that we have, that the city reach out in particular, to any owners of vacant property, but in particular to those along Ojai Avenue to the east of the downtown area, to see if any of them would be willing to be included in SPL overlays understanding that it does not require them to build affordable housing there. Doesn't require them to build anything, but in particular does not require them to build affordable housing on those parcels. That would be my two recommendations.
Good. And Lucas, a question, I know Chair Quillisi brought this up earlier, and that was in regards to sites 10 and 11. And the city is recommending to take them off the list, if I'm correct, but we didn't really find out why. And I'm, is that something that we would be able to find, have access to that information?
Yeah, I can get you more information.
Okay, good. Because that, I think, would help us in our decision-making process. There may be a very good reason we may go, oh, yes, take them off. But without having that background information, it's hard to say. So in the meantime, I agree with Chair Quillisi that for now, can we keep them on until we have more information, of course.
Better to have more on than more off. I agree with that.
Right. And I think Chair Quillisi's recommendation to reach out to some other potential sites if the city has, a list going, in addition to those people that are property owners reaching out to the city, because by June 3rd, that could even, once again, give us more information and potentially more properties to actually include.
Right.
I think those are two really good recommendations. And I think after looking at all that and having a good thorough discussion in more detail and having looked at the red line, I think we'd be more prepared to make, a recommendation or not. Yeah. But that's my opinion. Commissioner Swift and Commissioner Trent, do you have any ideas or comments about that? Or moving forward?
No, not at all. I guess another question is developments that might be planned or in the works. Is there a certain percentage that needs to be allocated for affordable housing, or is that part of the SLA or this program?
Yeah, there isn't a minimum requirement. We typically want to see affordable housing, and we push for that in those conversations early on with applicants. I can even think of an applicant that I'm working with right now that we're talking affordable housing. The inclusionary housing that Commissioner Lottis was alluding to and speaking about earlier, that's a requirement. Like there's a minimum standard that's placed on that. So
cool.
15-20%, that's the starting. I would call that the floor. So we're starting at 0 with these applicants that come in.
Okay, thank you.
Working up from there.
Okay, Commissioner Lottis?
Yeah, I also concur with Commissioner Chair Quillisi's recommendations, and to both keep for now the SPL at 10 and 11 and to reach out to property owners. And I would like to, and I appreciate the red line copy. I think that's great. I also would ask that there is something in the current housing element about maintenance and the importance of keeping our housing stock in good shape. But so let me, just a little background. So the city is not going to be doing a climate change element. And so policies related to climate change are supposed to be included in the elements that we're going to be working on. And so there is a letter of comment, but I would concur with that as well, that I would like to see more specificity in the section of I forget where it is, but the part of the housing elements talks about the importance of maintaining and taking care of our housing stock, particularly the apartment housing stock that we have, which is wonderfully kind of evenly dispersed throughout the community. We have apartments, we have single family homes, duplexes, and it's all blends in. We don't have any what I would consider an apartment ghetto. Yeah, we don't. It's just It's fantastic the way it is, and I think we really need to pay a lot of attention to preserving that housing stock. not allowing conversion to, say, condos, because the rental part of it is really, I think it's really significant. But along with that is the things we could do that also that help to protect the apartment housing stock or any housing stock, and also to fulfill climate change goals that kind of they tag together. And I'd like to see more emphasis of that if possible. That would be my recommendation on top of.
I agree with that as well. Yeah.
One
Lucas?
One additional point. I just received an email regarding one of the sites of one of the individuals that spoke tonight, but didn't mention the site. But that individual identified that they'd like to have 509 Grand Avenue added to the discussion as well. So I'll have that as a part of the discussion.
Great.
When we come forward. So lots of discussions going on.
Right.
Do we have any more call-ins?
Exactly. Wait, let me check the chat.
11th hour.
You know, it shows that there's a question on the Q&A, and I'm just going to look at it real quick. I don't know if it was. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss out some, that somebody had put something there. So I think if we're good, we can close the meeting, and then we would look forward to the June 2nd meeting to continue this.
Yep. In order for us to stay on task here, we've got to get to that June 2nd meeting, Veronica, and Jamie certainly know that.
Okay.
So, Jamie, I'm sorry, there's a lot of work for you to do, but it's good
everyone
work. We always call that good work.
Did Jamie come up with those numbers she was looking for
That's
there?
right.
Yes.
Before we close, that would be great.
I do have the homeless numbers for Ojai. So in 2012, for the last housing element, there were 41, and it went up to 49. And there was a decrease in overall homeless population for the county, but a slight increase for the city, or I guess it's almost 20% for the city.
So it went from 41 to 49?
Yes, for the point in time count for Ojai.
Okay. All right. That said, I'm going to close the meeting, and then I'll see all of you on Wednesday night. We'll be back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Jamie, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Night.